workshop final briefings. This represents 2 semesters of work pretending that the U.S. Congress is still passing environmental bills, which they haven't done since 1990. I want to welcome, we have some guests here who are prospective students. You'll notice them in the back row. They're all wearing name tags. And so I hope you sometime during one of our breaks come up and say hello to them and think about what it was like your first day here after the day after Memorial Day when we had orientation, or the next day when you got selected for the workshop groups that you're still in. It was warm and humid, and today it's not. Just be glad you're not in Buffalo, where I went to graduate school, where a friend of mine told me he couldn't open his front door today. They got 5 feet of snow. So anyway, today really represents the day when this simulation, where we've worked on trying to understand the science of these statutes and how to actually make them real, comes to fruition, and we start to hear from you on how you would actually implement these programs. This is an exercise that is particularly central to the curriculum because it allows us to integrate the things that you've learned in your management and economics and science courses in a problem-solving exercise, which is really what the program is all about. I'd like you to think from time to time as you watch your colleagues how much more we know about these subjects today than we did that day in late May when we started on this. How much you understand some of the problems in taking these ideas and making them real. How much I wish that the people who manage the Obamacare website had the same kind of understanding when they first launched that site, which is really to say how important management is to public policy. Policy is great, it's important, but management is just as important, if not more important. And so today is a day to hear about you making things real. So we're going to start with Professor Rosen's group, who is going to give us a briefing on the Community Parks Revitalization Act. So if that briefer could come forward.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Carolina Rosero, and I have the pleasure of representing the Community Parks Revitalization Act group in today's final briefing. I'd like to thank the faculty advisors for their valuable feedback last week, and especially to Professor Rosen for her guidance and direction throughout the semester, and to my teammates for their hard work and support. In today's presentation, I'll discuss the problem of increased urbanization and how HR 2424 provides a solution to that problem. I'll describe the first-year program design and implementation, and finally end with a few points on the future of the program implementation of this program. From 2000 to 2010, the United States saw a 14.3 urban growth rate, and in the dark green areas on this map, we see the 381 metropolitan statistical areas where more than 80% of the U.S. population is concentrated. And this increased population has resulted in detrimental effects to nature's ability to provide ecosystem services, and has also resulted in increased air pollution, which causes negative health impacts, and increased water runoff and water pollution, which has important implications for city budgets, as well as causes the urban heat island effect, which is oftentimes reflected in our energy bills. And this is where HR 2424, the Community Parks Revitalization Act, really comes into play. It's an act that establishes grants to build parks and infrastructure to help mitigate the negative environmental consequences of urbanization. And this is an act that draws from previous legislation under one umbrella and establishes 3 different grants with different focuses. The first one is the Rehabilitation and Construction Grant, which focuses on repairing, updating, and expanding upon existing facilities. The second grant is the Innovation and Recreation Grant, which builds on demonstration projects. So, for example, incorporating solar energy as an education mechanism for communities and neighborhoods. And the third grant is the Recovery Action Program Grant, which really seeks to work with metropolitan statistical areas in developing long-term sustainable plans for investment in parks. In order to do this, this flow chart shows the implementation process that begins when Congress authorizes the bill and authorizes the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development to establish the program. And HUD then creates the Parks Revitalization Office, which develops the program, supervises and monitors and evaluates the process. And local municipalities come into play because they can apply to receive these grants directly, or they can also work with local projects that might receive the funding. And that's when local projects can execute these project plans, and they coordinate with the respective authorities when needed. And so the first year program design really focuses on prioritizing established projects that have long-term vision and planning. So the first year will focus on water management schemes, and this is really important because these types of projects require a very heavy upfront investment and longer term in order to be able to see the impacts that these projects are going to have. And in order to implement the Recovery Action Planning grants with the metropolitan statistical areas, the Parks Revitalization Office also has to establish the criteria under which these are going to work. And in order to be able to implement this program design, there are three broad aspects that the Parks Revitalization Office has to address. The first are the operational components, the second is the grants administration process, and the third is measuring and reporting the impact of these projects. In order to do so, the Parks Revitalization Office has an extremely ambitious but feasible timeline for the first year. It'll begin in the national government's fiscal year, which begins in October of 2015 and ends in September of 2016. So by January, the Parks Revitalization Office will have been established and staffed, and the grant application development process will have already been underway, so that in February, the marketing of the grants can be implemented with the local municipalities. And grants will be reviewed on a rolling basis during 3 months, so that in July and in compliance with the city budgeting, the grant allocation can be done. And beginning in July, the Parks Revitalization Office will begin the preparations for the second phase of the program implementation, as well as begin monitoring the projects that have already begun. And in order to operationalize this calendar and these goals, the Parks Revitalization Office will be staffed by 8 people. The program administrator will oversee the overall program process. The compliance manager will develop the criteria for the implementation of the program and assure that the deadlines are being met. The information manager will oversee and lead the marketing and communications plan, and the grants administration manager will establish the components for the grants allocation and the monitoring of these grants. And the 4 ancillary staff members will coordinate with their respective managers, but they will also coordinate with each other depending on the workload throughout the year. And so for the first year, the program will have a $40 million budget, and only about 2.4% of that budget will go towards the administrative expenses. And 97%, or about 97% of that budget will go directly towards grants. And like I mentioned before, the grants that will be prioritized are those that are the rehabilitation grants of the existing projects. And with the established administration areas and all of these things, in order to be able to select the grants that will be, the projects that will be awarded these grants, this is an example of how the scoring process will work. There are 7 different evaluation criteria that will each be graded on a 4-point scale. And because the bill really emphasizes the environmental aspects of the environmental impacts of these projects, the environmental component will have a 40% weight, and the other 6 criteria will have a 10% weight, respectively. And once again, stressing the importance of these environmental impacts, projects that are able to increase pervious surfaces or incorporate water retention basins, like the illustration shows on the right-hand side, and projects that also increase vegetation coverage will be prioritized during this process. And once the projects have started and the grants have been allocated, the reporting process comes into play. Each year, the grantees will have to present an annual report to the Parks Revitalization Office with information regarding the environmental impact and the involvement of the community throughout the process. And at year 5, the Parks Revitalization Office, through HUD, will present an interim report with information regarding the environmental impact, the overall grants allocation process, and also include a financial report. And finally, at year 10, HUD will present a final report to Congress with information regarding the overall 10-year grant projects, the financial report, but more importantly, incorporate also an overall impact evaluation. And this impact evaluation is very important because it needs to prove the overall outcomes of these projects. So it'll show how these projects were able to improve stormwater management and by reporting the information on the amount of rainfall that was captured through pervious surfaces and through these retention basins. The ability of these projects to reduce air pollutant levels by reporting the good rating days that are had throughout the year on the air quality index, and how these projects were able to cool the areas in the surrounding areas. So by reporting the decrease in temperature of these parks. And looking ahead in the future, the Parks Revitalization Office has some very important tasks. First, it has to continue implementing the project monitoring to assure that the deadlines and the goals are being met. Second, it has to outsource audits to maintain the impartiality of evaluating all of these projects. It also has to continue coordinating with the metropolitan statistical areas in designing and implementing these long-term planning schemes. And finally, and probably most importantly, the Parks Revitalization Office should implement an evaluation of the ecosystem services that these parks provide in order to prove to Congress the importance of these, the importance and the value of these projects. Thank you very much. I will take any of your questions.
Hi, Carolina. That was a great presentation. Just want to know why you've only given 10% to monitoring and evaluation, given that monitoring and evaluation is a very valuable part of any project, especially this one.
Mm-hmm. So in the bill, there's heavy stress, and I'll go back to the slide so that we can look at it. There's a really heavy focus, first of all, on the environmental components and the community involvement, as well as the population reach. So these, and that includes minority populations and vulnerable communities. So the other components, as far as the conditions of facilities, financial sustainability, and the monitoring evaluation plan, were things that we incorporated because we thought that they were very important. But these are also things that the Parks Revitalization Office will have to implement as well. So the component here considers that the project proposals also include an internal monitoring and evaluation program. Thank you.